Hello everyone, it's Melanie here with Vintage Studio. Today I have another real leaf art project for you, and it is a Christmas card featuring a beautiful dimensional pine cone. So I'm working with a cypress branch this week. I wasn't sure how this would work with Mod Podge, so I'm going with another technique, which is watercolor. This Sizzix Biggs pine cone is wonderful. Here's an illustration by Jessica Heide showing you all the different parts of a pine cone if you're interested in that. When you run this through your die cutting machine, it cuts this beautiful pine cone with these little elements that can be bent back to give you the three-dimensional look. Isn't this fabulous? And you can still get this Biggs die. I just bought it on Amazon a year ago. So if you're interested and you have a die cutting machine that will work with the Biggs dies, this is a great one. It's hard to find this large of a pine cone. So I was happy to find this. This is my first time working with this pine cone. And I was trying to figure out what type of card to put it on. And so I'm going to use the real leaf art as the medium behind this pine cone. So back to our project here, I'm using a little ink to go over those bracts, and you can see I'm kind of mimicking what is on the packaging there, just staying towards the bottom of each bract, and then I will actually go around all the edges and concentrate a little more ink around the top of that pine cone. And although this isn't necessary, these little details really do make all the pieces and parts stand out. At least in my opinion they do, and they don't really take that much time, so it's well worth it to me. Look at this pine cone coming to life. Isn't that gorgeous? Okay, next thing I'm going to do is add a little water to some white acrylic paint. I'm getting that watered down to kind of an inky consistency, and then I'll just tap that against my finger to add some splatters to finish off this pine cone. Then I'll take my bone folder and lightly pull against each of those bracts, curling them up so they have a tendency to stay up, giving it that 3D look. And this is a little heavier weight cardstock, so that works perfectly. Okay, now I'm moving on to the watercolor here. I've taken a tube of watercolor and added some water, and I'm working on the consistency to see what I need for this branch, because I've never worked with a cypress branch before. So I'm just going to keep going back and forth here between water and my watercolor, and then I'm going to test this on my scrap of paper to see if I've got a consistency that will work for an impression. Take a look here. It's looking good. So now I can move on to my watercolor panel. This is just a watercolor panel from Langnickel. I don't know the weight of it, but I did learn recently that if you add water to both sides of your watercolor panel, there is less likelihood of warping. So I tried it, and guess what? That's true. It does work. So I will lightly add water to both sides of my watercolor panel before I get ready to do my real leaf impressions. So just a little tip there I wanted to share with you. I thought that was a good one. Since I'm not using a hardboard and I'm not going to tape this down because I'm going from edge to edge with my leaves, or this branch, I didn't want a lot of warping. So maybe if that's a takeaway from this video, that's a good one if you like to work with watercolor paper. Okay, so now here I'm going back through that watercolor technique and just adding it to the branch, and then I will get that put down on that slightly wet watercolor panel. So the tip here is when you get ready to lay this down, just lay it down. There's no moving it, because remember, you're working with a wet branch here and you're working with a slightly wet watercolor panel. You don't want this smeared, you do want an impression, and if it bleeds a little bit because of the wet watercolor paper, that's fine. But just lay it down. I like to use a scrap piece of paper over the top, which keeps the paint from getting on my fingers and then me getting my fingerprints onto the watercolor panel. So that's why I just use this sheet of paper. And it dries so quickly I can use the sheet of paper over and over and it's not going to affect my panel. So you just continue this way, adding as many or as few layers as you want. You can see you've got some different variations of shades of that color on your impression, which to me gives it more organic interest. I want you to know that this was made from a real leaf. And because it's not a perfect impression, I think that adds to the realism. So you see, some lighter, some darker. Now if you want to, you can take a little water sprayer. I've got a little spritzer here. I'm going over this branch that already has the watercolor on it. And when you do this, you're going to add some background layers that kind of fade off behind the more bold layers. Isn't that cool? This is such a fun project. I think you could do this with kids as well. And it's fun to just see it come to life. Now I have taken a couple of other colors like a green and a golden brown color and mixed those together, and that came up with kind of this olive green. And I'm just going to go right over this branch. You can see I am not washing it off between colors. It does not matter that much. And I'm going to add another shade of green. Now you can do as many shades as you want. Today I have just done 2 shades. And that was perfect for me. I love the way this came out. So see, just adding a little more interest. Now you want to make sure you don't make it so heavy that you lose some of the white space there in your composition. That's what gives it kind of that watercolor look, is leaving some white space. Okay, I'm going to go down. I went down the middle and down one side. Now I'm going to go along the top just to even this out with some of that olive color. And then I will take another look at my composition and see if I need to do anything else. It's looking good. You can see this goes fairly quickly just to get the background here. I love it. I love, love, love it. All right, let's put our pine cone on there and see how those look. It looks okay, but I needed a little more down in that corner, so I will be working on that. Just to extend the length of that middle branch, because it's looking a little squared off to me. And I need a little more length here to balance out that beautiful pine cone that I'm going to put in that top corner. Okay, I think that will do it. Let me bring my pine. Yes, that looks better. Okay. So now we are moving on to adding a few splatters for the background color. This is in contrasting colors. I used a gold and a brown. I thought those would look really good with the pine cone, just so we don't have so much green going on in the background. Not to take away from the real leaf art, but just to add to the overall aesthetic of our finished piece here. There we go. Now when I put this on my card panel, I did cut out down the watercolor panel, as you can see. This is a 5 by 7 inch card base, and that looks okay, but it was a little dull, so I decided I need to do something here. So I first tried adding some faux stitch lines around the edge, and to do that I'll bring over a T-ruler, and I have a fine nib marker. It's a brush marker that's a brush on one end and a fine nib on the other, and that comes in really handy if you want to add stitch lines. So that's what I'm going to give a try here, is to add these stitch lines. I'm going to go around the whole perimeter just to add a little more interest and another color. So I'll get that done very quickly. I kind of have to hold on to this ruler because of that watercolor paper is a little heavier than other papers. But I got that done and that looked great. So I put that down on my card. Something's still a little too stark here, so I brought back over that same walnut stain ink that I used on the pine cone, and I'm going to go around all of the edges of my watercolor panel, going a little heavier in the corners, and that begins to look a little better to me. Just a little more interest, a little more pop of color than just the green. And I'm ready to take another look at that against that craft card base. That looks good, but now my card base looks a little stark, so I'm going to go around the edges of the card base very quickly. Same ink. You don't have to change things up. It will all coordinate. Everything looks a little different depending on what color you apply it against, even if it is the same color ink. Now that looks a lot better to me. So one of the things I love to do with a watercolor panel is add foam tape. So I will add foam tape across the whole back of this watercolor panel. That will help it lay very straight, and it provides excellent adhesion between the watercolor paper and the cardstock. So I get that put down on the front of my card here. All right. That looks so good. There's a little bit of dimension. Then my pine cone will go right there. I'm adding some liquid adhesive, staying away from those openings. I don't want to glue down the bracts that I curled back. I want those to stand up, so I've only gone around the edges and in between all of those cuts. And then I'm going to add a little jute bow, trim off the ends of that. Add the word peace that I cut out with a letters die cut. And that finishes my card for today. I'm so glad you dropped by. I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you can go out and look at some branches that may work for your real leaf art for Christmas cards. And I'd love to hear comments from you if you have anything you want to share with me. And if you are new to the channel, I invite you to become a subscriber. And thank you to everyone who follows me weekly. Welcome back. Hope to see you again next week. Happy crafting, everyone.